I got the Oscar, I got the Emmy, I got the 2 Tonys. I've done Broadway, I've done off-Broadway, I've done TV, I've done film, I've done all of it. I have a career that's probably comparable to Meryl Streep, Julianne Moore, Sigourney Weaver. They all came out of Yale. They came out of Juilliard. They came out of NYU. They had the same path as me. And yet, I am nowhere near them. Not as far as money, not as far as job opportunities, nowhere close to it. And yet, I have to constantly get on that phone, and I have fabulous agents, by the way. They are getting it. But I have to get on that phone, and people say, "You're a black Meryl Streep." You are, and we love you. We love you. There is no one like you. Okay, then if there's no one like me, you think I'm that, you pay me what I'm worth. You give me what I'm worth.
What is up, guys? Welcome to the Meaning of Podcast. I'm Andres.
This is RP3.
And joining us today is the producer of iHeartRadio's Fake Doctors, Real Friends, Red Table Talk, and so much more. Joelle Monique is in the house. What is up, Joelle?
Oh my gosh, you guys, it's so hot and I can't leave my house because death is outside. It's frustrating, I think is the best way to put it. It's frustrating.
Yeah. So it's been a minute, but obviously I've kind of done this with every guest. Quarantine, how has it been like? What have you been up to?
Yeah, I live in the living room of my brother's apartment. So I was here before because I was, searching around for jobs, and I got this mother of a job at iHeart, which is really cool. And I was planning to leave, and I can't. Now, some people are moving. I'm hesitant to do so. I don't know, trucks moving people, contact with human beings. The most adventurous thing I've done in quarantine is I bought a new fridge because ours stopped working and it's hot and I need, popsicles in the fridge or I'll die. So we bought a new fridge, and that was like a whole harrowing adventure of like, can they deliver? What time will they deliver? Is it safe? Do they feel safe coming in? How do we make them feel safe when they arrive? Like, it's a lot of negotiating in this new world, but I think as bad as it has been for a lot of people, I feel very blessed and lucky to just have a place and be with people I love. I'm not alone. I think that would be really hard for me. I know a lot of people are struggling with that. So a challenge, but hopefully rising to meet it.
So talk to me a little bit about being producer at iHeartRadio. That's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, it's a sweet gig, man. Everybody there is super cool, and I mean that legitimately, and not in the I work for this company and I need to talk it up way. People who are maybe older fans of the, of course I'm going to forget the website's name right now, Cracked.com, back in the day, like when it was new and fresh and amazing. Jack O'Brien ran it. I used to read that site like a crazy person. I was really obsessed with the articles. It always like lended itself to new information and like interesting angles on things. And now he runs the podcast division where I work. And so I work for one of the coolest people on the planet. And I get to do a lot of really cool shows. So it's a lot of work. I have 9 shows right now.
Wow.
Yes. But I have amazing hosts and business partners, and it's better than any other job I've ever had.
That's great.
I miss our offices. I finally had a cool, hip Hollywood office that overlooked the city. We had this great skyline view and a wraparound balcony, and it was the best space to work. Katie Couric was just showing up, recording her podcast, and now we're all at home. And I'm like, dang, took away all my cool factor and my snacks.
That is really cool. I'm so happy for you, Joelle.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, that's the first thing I want to say, because that is really cool, especially during this time where a lot of people are losing gigs left and right. I know a lot of my friends have lost their gigs, and we're just getting gigs like in March and in February, and then just lost it because of quarantine and because of Corona. So I'm so happy for you, Joelle. That's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm counting my blessings every day. I'm very fortunate.
And this topic you chose is something that is great, because we've been talking about it for a while now on this podcast and on this YouTube channel, which is Black women in film, which is something that is so important, especially nowadays, where I feel like there's a conversation of having more Black talent on screen and behind the camera, but specifically Black women, which has kind of been the most overlooked in all of Hollywood. We talked about it, I believe, about 2-3 weeks ago when we were talking about Black film in general, and the idea of how Black women have been notoriously, purposefully overlooked. We recently had Josh Trank on an episode here, and he told us that he was told that he cannot hire a black woman to play Sue Storm. That he was like, they went out of their way to tell him that we do not want a black woman to play Sue Storm, even though Michael B. Jordan is Johnny Storm.
I read that shit and I was just the most floored, especially because if you think about when that movie came out, like Lupita is just popping off, like she's really the hot thing in that moment. But then you also have all of these other black women who've been around for a long time who could have filled that role, and I'm talking like older women, like 40s, 30s, 50s, and 60s. You could have had a young, new, cool chick. Like it's incredible to me that you could fix your mouth to say no, you can't hire a certain race. That's bizarre. And two, that you would think that there isn't the talent available, or that people don't want to invest / view that talent when we see these major movies like Fast and the Furious have these incredibly diverse casts and sell billions of dollars worth of product. It's just crazy.
Yeah, especially that we can see it, that it's incredibly marketable, because that's always the argument they want to use. But let's go back, because I didn't want to talk about it, but I kind of feel like I have to, just because it's been in the news a little bit, and that's Gone with the Wind. Which is kind of the notorious idea of not just getting roles, but the right roles and the proper roles, and the kind of roles that are kind of bad and are kind of taking away from the conversation of what should be had and progress in that sense. And obviously, RB3 has talked at length about slave movies, and kind of the idea of only giving awards out for slave movies is also a big conversation to be had. But what are your thoughts on that? And what are your thoughts on the idea of HBO Max kind of going out of their way to remove that?
Well, so I have many thoughts. One, I tend to like Warner Brothers' approach to problematic historical content. So if you watch Warner Brothers, Looney Tunes, a lot of times they were like pickaninnies, a lot of racist depictions of not just black people, but Japanese people during the 1940s, like long history of just really bad representation. So Warner Brothers has a choice of either removing that stuff, not releasing it, hiding it, burying it their past, or just being like, yo, different time, regret what we did, can't take it back. It's a part of the zeitgeist, a part of not just our culture as a company, but a part of American culture. So we present it here to you in its fullness, in open honesty, just as it is. I think that's a responsible approach, because it doesn't let you off the hook. It doesn't try to hide what was happening. You can still, and it's like shocking to see these depictions. And I think that's why, in some capacity, in some space, they need to be viewed. I think especially if you're going to look particularly at the movie Gone with the Wind, Hattie McDaniel won an Oscar for that, and she won it not necessarily for playing and when I say that, she played the mammy in the film. So if you've seen, Scarlett is running around and just having a whole mess, and here comes Hattie, not playing the like, oh, let me get you ready and like help, but like a very forceful kind of mother / teacher figure, where she's like, I'm not going to let you be a spoiled child in front of me. You're a grown woman. You're being silly. You're being ridiculous. And that was Hattie finding humanity in these women who actually had these jobs, who actually did have to go to work and work for these oppressive people in these menial jobs without the possibility of escaping those jobs. There was no hierarchy. You can't move past mammy. That's it. You know, I think finding that humanity and seeing how a Black woman of that era wanted to portray herself, and the fact that it won her an award, and the fact that everyone was able to take notice of the strong decisions she made as an actress, erasing that is infuriating to me. There's a whole history behind it. So even as we see roles that make us uncomfortable or bad, to look away, to deny that they happened, does not help us grow. It simply removes really responsibility, because what people are afraid of is like, oh, I don't want them to point at us and say, look at what we did. But you did do it. It's done. It's okay. Because it happened. It has to be okay. We're all here. So just own it, so that in the future we can always look back at that moment and be like, gosh, we should never have to go back to this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's so many arguments there, because that's such a good perspective. The idea, though, that it becomes this celebration of I mean, again, I always talk about this, but I kind of feel like it is relevant. And that's the idea of the president tweeting about it and saying, hey, that's my movie. Don't you dare delete my movie. And the way that he tries to celebrate the idea and the framing of Gone with the Wind of like, let's go back to those days, the good old days, the way that the president wants to talk about it. But yeah, I definitely wanted to get your perspective on that. But obviously, we have to talk about Blaxploitation, which is something we've been talking about, I believe, for like several episodes.
Yes.
Which kind of introduced this new style. And obviously, I feel like I always bring it up. But please, have you seen Watchmen?
Did I see Watchmen?
Yeah,
I wrote all the reviews for the AV Club on it.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Joelle.
It's okay.
Those are great reviews, by the way. Those are great reviews.
Oh, there you go.
Thank
I should have
you.
just asked RB3.
Didn't somebody retweet one of them, like one of the stars of the show or something like that? Like,
Yeah, I mean, some of the creators I know at least read them. Issa Rae retweeted it, which was crazy
that's right.
because she was not even gagged about the review, but about the framing of a sentence in there. And I was like, "Oh, that's my work." I was
Nice.
like, yeah. So yeah, they got a lot of attention, which I was
That's so
kind of
cool.
honored to talk about.
Yeah.
The idea of looking at erased Black history and putting
Mm-hmm.
it in a space where most Americans are going to watch. We love superhero content. I think people are like, oh, it's going to die down. People don't want it anymore. I'm not seeing that at all. I don't get the sense that people are done with their favorite supers. I think it'll evolve how we view them, but I think these characters are here to stay. It's just a brilliant idea for Watchmen to do that, and I was honored to sort of have a space to talk about it as it was happening.
Oh, it was incredible. And obviously we're going so off topic. I'm so sorry. But yeah, the
No.
idea that if there really was a superhero, and the reframing and the restructuring of like, wait a minute, if there was a superhero, who better than a Black man fighting against oppressive people? That is what a superhero is. And that's what we saw in Watchmen. I thought that was beautiful. But in Watchmen, we get that quick scene that RB3 loves. And RB3 always says it best when Angela's character sees herself in that Blaxploitation movie. And she always says, I cater to it because she looked like me. And that was so important to her. But during that era, that was a big deal. The Blaxploitation movies were a very big deal. And I want to toss it to you, RB3, because I feel like I've been talking so much. But talk to me a little bit about Blaxploitation and that era.
yeah, I mean, we've talked about before on this podcast. Really started a lot with Melvin Van Peebles, sweet badass, movie saga, and then we saw Shaft being Warner Brothers' first time financing a Black-led movie from a Black director, from Gordon Parks. But then, we start looking at the feminine perspective, which, we're going to talk about here. You look at somebody like Pam Grier, who kind of made a name for herself as like, the lead Blaxploitation lady. And she kind of exuded a lot of the same qualities that the men exuded in Blaxploitation, but from a feminine perspective. Because for a lot of times, at least from my perspective, a lot of the men were like these womanizers who like did nothing but kill people and move around all cool. But then at least they gave a flip side to that, where the women were actually using their sexuality to get their job done too. So I think just overall it was a really cool method of cinema that we saw, at least like it was, and it was way different than what we saw before from the past representation. Now we got to actually see Black powerful figures, and maybe while it's maybe not the most like, maybe while it hasn't aged the best, it did give a new light to Black cinema at its time. So
Yeah, definitely. I think specifically if you're talking about Black women in the 70s, there's this really great interview that's sort of been making the rounds on Black Twitter between James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni, who are these Black American, I would say, civil rights commentators. They both marched, they both gave speeches, they were both actively a part of the movement, but so much of what they contributed to society was in a breakdown and a discussion and an evolution of what it means to have civil rights. And Nikki Giovanni talks to James, who's I think like 15, 20 years older than her, about the plight of the modern woman. So in this era, I think it's 1971, 72, the interview is happening. She's talking about like Black men during the 60s and even the 50s and 40s as they're first starting these fights in a more protest manner. start struggling with the identity of not being able to provide, right? And you can't provide because the system isn't there to provide for you. That's sort of what Shaft and a lot of these blaxploitation movies are talking about. It's like, when do you turn to violence? When do you like start to pimp? When do you start selling in drugs? How do drugs corrupt the community? And a lot of that comes from not having equal rights to jobs, from the redlining that happened in real estate, which prevented Black people from acquiring homes and businesses and things like that. And so up into the 70s, before the women's lib movement happens, Black men are dealing with that. And a lot of times the way you deal with that is like just to completely shut down. If I can't provide, I'm going to walk away. I'm not man enough. I'm not good enough. That's a sentiment that is still, I think, heard in certain sects of the Black populace of America today. But women in 1971 were like, listen, if you have empathy and if you can stay and just figure it out, then we could be cool. And they started demanding not just that like men be present and active participants of their life, but that they also have equal rights. That's when the women's lib movement comes in. And that's when you get films like Coffee and Switchblade Sisters and all these really cool like blaxploitation, badass. If you think white America was doing it too with Charlie's Angels, you suddenly had women who were like not just inhabiting professional jobs, but inhabiting professional jobs that were considered just for men. And that becomes like a really exciting space because, yeah, while, you know, it's frustrating that they're all like big tittied, like flawless faces, gorgeous gowns, like, you know, amazing ideals of, what is the word I'm looking for, of the male gaze, essentially. It was still empowering because that image just pure didn't exist before. And I think in the same way that we see movies like, and these are masterpieces, so I'm not trying to diminish them, but things like Boys in the Hood, if we look even later, Waiting to Exhale, these films that are like for the first time just showed a speck of humanity that wasn't available to people before. Of course we grasp onto that. Of course we have to cling to that because, oh my God, there I am up on the big screen. That makes me equal to all of these other people that I've always only seen on the big screen. Yes, early blaxploitation films as they pertain to Black women was frustrating. A lot of times a guy was evolving as he got to lighter skinned women, eventually white women. It was like a prize. And there's a lot of degrading images and sentences, really. Some of the things said to women in these films are definitely problematic, but there's also like a lot to love and a lot to inspire, a lot that did inspire an entire generation of women to sort of do it on their own.
Yeah, and I think RB3 and I talked about it last time, the idea of the balance between a lot of it was really toxic masculinity and a lot of it was really empowering, and what a lot of people get different perspectives as far as like, how do we view this now in this era in 2020? How do we view these films? Do we see the negative aspects and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't glorify this, or should we see the positive aspects? But RB3, talk to me a little bit about that when it comes to blaxploitation in general, as far as what the guys were doing.
Well, it's complicated because like Joelle said, it's kind of like a nuanced like conversation because in the beginning, yeah, it was really trashy, and particularly with Melvin Von Peebles' film. I mean, his movie was just absolutely like outrageous. Like our main character there, you know, he's literally like a sex addict who I think even if I'm not mistaken, his like either him or his son got like a STD like after the filming of that movie or something like that. So so it's like it's really insane, but then again, it goes to show like evolution and growth. And, you know, we spoke about it last time we talked about Black cinema, but up until that point, Black characters and, you know, especially Black women were just mostly erased from the genre completely. Like in the 60s, we started getting more like Sidney Poitier movies, and we started getting like social dramas and stuff like that. But we didn't end up getting like real leading men and women who were standing up against the system, standing up against white people until blaxploitation got around. So it's really crazy. I have a hard time looking at it. I think just like with all film just has like a lot of different sides. You know, as much as I love Spike Lee, I can easily, you know, and we're going to talk about it sure in a little bit here, but you can easily look at some of his films and be like, whoa, what are you doing, bro? Like, especially when it comes to his representation of women. So it just, and you look at some of his other work, and some of it is quite positive. So it just goes back and forth, and it all comes with like understanding too, because like especially in the 70s, like we have figures like Angela Davis and prominent like political and civil rights activists who were speaking loudly and boldly, but the cinema almost during that time almost in a lot of ways it embodied a lot of black figures, but it also embodied a lot of embodied a lot of black figures, and it embodied a lot of black power ideology, but it didn't necessarily do the greatest job representing like the social aspect of betterment, right? Like it kind of continues to perpetrate stereotypes without giving like light to changes and solutions and stuff like that, which is why in today's cinema we see something like Black Panther, which is something I really enjoy, that actually is kind of like the best of both worlds. Like it gives you the motivation, like the power, the message, while also giving you like kind of an upbeat way of like looking at how society can evolve into the future. So, but again, that's talking 2018 versus 50 years ago, 1968, which was just like a completely different universe. So as the country evolves and as the world evolves, our perspective of how we're going to interpret a lot of these things is bound to change too.
Yeah. And what I'm curious, what shifted in the 80s and 90s when it comes to the kind of roles that black women were getting inside Hollywood? What do you think? What do you think changed, Joelle, in general, when it comes to the kind of roles that we're getting?
Well, so what's happening in Hollywood between like, I want to say 1975 and 1989, right? So in the 70s, you see a decline in the studio system. So you're post what was known as the 30s, 50s, like great era of studio films. And you move more into indies, right? And a lot of that comes from our ratings board and the fact that, they were making these very cool, down to earth, in the moment films in Europe, and they were making their way here, and it started to impact and change the way we saw film. And you have stars like Woody Allen. It's upsetting that that's the only independent filmmaker I can think of from that time right now. But like that scene, Robert De Niro, Lord help me,
Robert Townsend,
Martin Scorsese, but also Martin Townsend. Like all these people start developing their independent films. They're going out. Film becomes more affordable at this point in time. The guerrilla shooting becomes very popular. This is when Julie Dash she becomes the first black woman to get a film distributed nationally in America, right? That's 1982, I want to say. And she has to like hit big at Cannes with Daughters of the Dust in order to get that opportunity, right? So it's sort of a world cinema perspective reflected back in America that starts opening these doors. And as black people sort of stop asking for permission to play with their white counterparts in Hollywood, and they started making their own, and those became financial successes, that's when people jumped on. If you think of what Spike Lee was doing early on in his career, is essentially aggregating all of the great theater talent in New York and throwing it up on the screen. There's an entire community of black creatives who have largely been ignored, are largely performing for themselves to black audiences, now have spaces to do the film version of that. And I think that's sort of the major changes and what led to a lot more black depiction in cinema.
Yeah. RB3?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think that's, the rise of the independence movement definitely plays a big part into it. Like you kind of said, Joelle, filmmakers like Spike Lee, like Judi Dash, and a lot of other filmmakers during that time, really rose to prominence. It was kind of, and in film school, they kind of call it the beginning of like the postmodern era, like where things moved away from the traditional, like you said, Hollywood fare, like the big spectacle stuff, and started getting more character driven and more insightful into a lot of things, and into human life, into characters, into drama, into story, and that kind of rose into prominence thanks largely to independence movement, thanks largely to Sundance Film Festival, which I believe opened in 83 or 84, if I'm not mistaken. So there was a lot of opportunity for independent filmmaking to rise. And as we talked about in our last Black Cinema episode, Black filmmaking is really inherently connected to independent filmmaking all the way from the beginning, with Oscar Micheaux, who literally was carrying his films under his arms and taking them to theaters to display them. So it's always been having to fight our way up from the indie circuit. And thankfully, because the indie circuit started becoming more prevalent in the 80s and 90s, we started seeing more Black filmmakers behind the camera telling our stories. So I think it's a really great thing to see. I think because of that, we ended up seeing stuff like Do the Right Thing, which, is a classic masterpiece, came out in '89. And then we also saw a lot of smaller films that came out during that time too. But it was largely, I feel like, even though we saw a lot more indie movies and we saw a lot more stories being told, it was still largely like focused on the dudes. And I think it kind of took a little bit of a shift, like towards the late 80s, early 90s, to where, studios started getting more behind appealing to Black audiences particularly.
I would push that. It happened in the mid 90s. Like, if you think, I would say Daughters of the Dust started it in an indie sense, but studios picked up on it with films like Soul Food and Waiting to Exhale. And then you get
Stella Got Her Groove Back.
Stella Got Her Groove Back. Yes, absolutely. And then Eve's Bayou sort of, I think, becomes the pinnacle of art and Hollywood and the Black women movement that happened really just probably for 7 or 8 years. It was quick, y'all. It came and went, because then the power turned right back over to the dudes in the early 2000s when you have Tyler Perry comes out and starts making films that are maybe specifically categorized to like Christian families, and then maybe women, and then like a larger comedic audience. It's really the star power of Black pop singers and models that sort of give us the ability to then create actors out of those individuals who already had star power, who already had huge followings, or you had great character actors who had come up in other films that were able to sort of were probably uplifted by the Black community, and it was like, no, that girl can act, she has to be in this movie too. It's quick, and I think people are quick to forget that, and it's something I worry about in our current movement, where we have like all these Black creators coming out and making this great stuff. Just today, we found out Matthew Cherry has a new animated series coming out. I'm so excited for him. He's an incredible talent. It's important that we remember how quickly these things can come and go, and that we continue to persist and demand that we have more Black representation in film.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because again, the 90s came with the hip hop movement too, obviously the late 80s as well. And that added on film, because then these hip hop people had that same talent that they brought on film, which again added to more representation when it comes to that as well. However, let's talk about the big thing in the room, which is, what videos and dissertations have been written about, which is Halle Berry. Which comes with a lot of baggage, honestly, because it comes with a lot of nuance as far as what type of role she was playing that she won the Oscar for, and the fact that we haven't seen an Oscar win for Best Actress for Black women since Halle Berry, which I believe was 2001?
2001. And if I'm not mistaken, she's the one and only for lead actress.
Wow. You're not mistaken.
So yeah,
that's insane.
Yeah, one and only. And then, going back to real quick to Joelle's point about like the pop stars, right? The only other there's a few other nominees, but one of the other more prominent nominees was Diana Ross back in like 1972. When she played Billie Holiday. So, again, because of the rise of Black art and music and stuff like that, we see more being put on screen. And then going back to that 1972 year, I think I mentioned it on the last time we talked about it, but that was a weird year that there was actually 2 Black women nominated in the same category for Best Actress. Neither of them won, but since 1973, we've never seen that happen again in Academy history, where 2 Black women were nominated for Best Lead Actress. So it's and Cicely Tyson, salute to Cicely Tyson. She's one of the all-time classic actors too. But going to the Halle Berry, ding, it's sad that the one Oscar she won is because she had to play like a mentally handicapped, grieving widow who is getting laid down by ugly old Billy Bob Thornton. You know what I mean? Like, what's going on? Like, what's going on here? Like, I don't know. So it's really sad. And it's unfortunate, but you see the kind of roles they give Oscars to black people for. They won't give Denzel an Oscar for playing Malcolm X. They'll give Denzel an Oscar for playing a corrupt cop. They won't give Lupita Nyong'o an Oscar for, you know, one of her hundreds of great performances, but they'll give her one for 12 Years a Slave. So it's just, you know, and Viola Davis is probably the closest, I think, who probably came to winning in recent time with The Help. And then she barely, you know, she lost out to Meryl Streep, but a lot of people thought it was going to be Viola Davis. But again, The Help, like, that's what, you know, they're willing to reward. They're not willing to reward, like, excellence and, you know.
Three Billboards Outside Ebbing County. Crash. White people love a movie about race that's not really addressing anything. Like, they really enjoy watching white people apologize and become knowledgeable, because I think a lot of white people think that's the end result. Like, oh, you're like overtly racist, and then you realize that you're being bad and you change, and then everything is fine, which is not the case at all. But they don't know that because we haven't centered black stories. Like, the trauma that like one N-word loud like launched at you can cause, like how that sticks with you frequently for life. You never forget that day. Like, it's impact. Right. And so, and you know, RB3, you rang off a great list of women who've done incredible roles who got no recognition. And I think the one we all think about the most is Miss Angela Bassett, played Tina Turner, one of the greatest all-time icons in 1993. I don't think she could even catch a nomination, which is crazy because she became Tina Turner on screen. Like, she did everything. And if you think about it, it's not just a past fault. Dolomite Is My Name was one of the best films of last year, and I will fight people on that. Like, it has all of the classic Hollywood bait. It's a period film. It's about Hollywood. It's up and coming, like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps story. It's a stacked cast with interesting newcomers, and they couldn't catch an Oscar now. Like, to be completely shut out, insanity.
Yeah. Alrighty, guys, we're going to take a break. After the break, we're going to be talking about the modern roles that we see now, and then the future of roles that black women are doing. So make sure you guys stick around.
This ain't funny, so don't you dare laugh. With the 4/5 divide you in half. You getting at me equals a club half. You do the math, take you out the equation. This ain't funny, so don't you dare.
Check out this clip from our First Cut live stream from this Wednesday. Enjoy.
So for anyone who doesn't know, we're obviously lined up with Geeks of Color, which is Dorian Parks' amazing site. Shout out to Dorian Parks. Dorian, he appears and reappears every month or so.
Like a gopher.
Yeah.
Just goes and then goes away. Yeah.
Homie is like a spirit. He just like pops in and pops out. But we're associated with Geeks of Color, and we now have an official website where you can find our links to everything we do. You can find our conversations. We have a nice little banner that has our faces on it. So we want to utilize that. We want to hopefully send that to people who don't know who we are, and we can say, hey, we're official. We're not just random people talking through Zoom about movies. We're like sort of official.
But no, you're random people talking through Zoom about movies with the website. That's what you're
website.
That's right. We have a website. Check out our new website on geeksofcolor.co/first-cut to check out our reviews, our videos, and articles that pertain to everything First Cut related. Check it out.
Come along, children. Now we're going to have a little music.
What is up, guys? We're back talking about black women in Hollywood. Now let's get into the kind of roles that we're seeing nowadays, Joelle. Obviously, we see a lot of incredible roles, but what RB3 said right before the break, we're still getting kind of the same old The Help, white savior type movies, at least the ones that are getting recognition. We still see that a lot. I mean, how long ago was that movie? Like 6 years ago? It wasn't like 20, 30 years ago. And that's the movie that got a lot of recognition. However, let's shine a light a little bit on the positive. What do you see positively that's changing?
Man, what I see most positively is because of the internet, Black creators have a direct outlet to their Black audience, right? So before, I mean, we took it all the way back to Oscar Michaud earlier. You know, he's carrying around his films, trying to get them in front of the eyes of people who need to see it most, the people who will pay to see it, the people who will value it as art, which is the constant struggle of the Black artist. I think because the internet exists and because we have such genius creators, Ava DuVernay is obviously like Mountain Peak like example, but also who's homegirl? I'm having such a brain fart. She's doing the horror movie Candyman.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
No, we got to say her name. Hold on. Oh, let's do it quick.
Oh man, I feel bad.
No, it's good. We gonna find it.
Well, also Casey Lemons too.
Cassie Lemons, yes.
Lemons, yeah.
She is the shit. Cassie is everything to me. Cassie, if you don't know Cassie Lemons started with Spike, started in theater doing costumes. So all of the outfits in Do the Right Thing, that's Cassie. In School Days, that's Cassie. Then she goes on to direct her own movie, the biggest of which is East Bayou. But she's got a couple of others that are like really interesting, usually dark and gritty, usually not anything. She's not concerned about the commercial, right? She's concerned about telling these interesting, weird, one-off Black stories that are not meant to appeal to the entire diaspora, which I think is great. I think so many times Black artists are struggling to create for all Black people, which is such a task to ask any artist to do. And frequently it makes their movies muddy or available for white consumption at a rate that can be troubling. Like, it applies to all audiences. So I really like what Cassie does. Why are you not showing me the 2020 version of Candyman?
Nia DaCosta?
Nia DaCosta!
Yeah.
Yes! Nia is coming up doing fabulous things. This is a woman who understands horror, and I feel like women direct horror so well. If you haven't seen Nia's movie, Little Woods, it's about the opium epidemic, which is rampant in this country, hardly talked about at all, despite the fact that thousands of people die at the least weekly. But I want to say it's a lot of people dying every day because they're addicted to this drug that is given to us by doctors, that is pushed to us like any other drug dealer in the street. And she tackles this movie with such grace and vibrata, and it's so moving and dark, but also such a story of survival. Excuse me. And I think when we think about women often in film and we think about them as survivors, we have to go to the hardcore extremes of like a Lara Croft or something like that, or you know, or a slave movie, or a 12-year like, oh gosh, so harrowing, poor Lupita, how did she get out of there? But like being a single mom living in a trailer, or being a sister who's responsible, who has entire family members, none of whom can keep their lives together, and so you have to do it yourself. Like, these are the stories of actual human beings that are happening every day, that are just as harrowing, that are just as important. And I think that's really the change that we're seeing in our modern stories, is that it's no longer an investment in our visibility for white people, right? A lot of films like are explaining, please understand our humanity, white people. Please see the struggle we go through, white people. Please see us as humans. We'll like raise our pants up. Don't shoot us. Like, it's literally pleading with Americans to recognize Black humans as human, right? And that's a lot of work to be doing. The great Toni Morrison, it says that racism is a distraction, because if somebody tells you your head is shaped wrong, you have to constantly prove, no, it's not, but you can't get any work done because you're explaining yourself to other people. I think we've removed that distraction, or we're in the process of attempting to remove that distraction from our current Black cinema, because we have a bunch of Black creatives able to talk with one another via social media, because they're able to raise money through that, because you can see the numbers, the number of people watching them, the number of people who like the content they're creating. It makes, or at least gives, it removes the ability for studios to say this is not popular, or this won't sell, or people don't like it, because it's in everybody's face. We can all see it. I think those are the greatest changes that we're making in our modern day movements.
And it comes from the idea of what RB3 always talks about, which is putting more Black creators behind the camera and in positions of power, whether it's producers, executive producers, presidents, vice presidents, having their own production companies, telling the stories they want to tell and portraying it in a manner that they want to portray it like. Nia DaCosta, Ava DuVernay is obviously probably the GOAT of that.
I want to shout out director of Queen and Slim, and I always mispronounce her name, so Andres, you might need to help me out here. But Malia Matsukas? Matsukas, yeah. I'm bad pronouncing names, so.
It's okay. Yeah, Melina Matsukas, who's great. And if you don't know Melina, you know her work. She's done a ton of music videos. Her most famous is Beyonce's Lemonade. She directed a lot of the shots on the plantation. She has I got to interview her earlier this year for Cultured, and I interviewed her and Lena Waithe. They're best buddies. And they're best friends with like Solange, which is like the coolest group of individuals on the planet. But Melina talks about like her inspiration comes from like National Geographic, and her father did like portraiture, like he did photography. And so that's why in a lot of her movies and a lot of her music videos and things like that, you get just people staring at the camera in that weird, like staggered, but looks like effortlessly cool positioning. If you think of Solange's wedding photos, that's Melina's style, right? She is such a badass and such a great director. She has such an understanding of space, which I find to be one of the most interesting aspects of cinema, is how do you control not just what people are seeing, but like the size of things. How big is the earth that you're looking at? What's the angle from which you approach it? And she's always got such a photographer's eye that it becomes very interesting.
That's so cool. I want to talk about what I've been talking about every time we do a female director on an episode. And that's the idea of kind of it didn't really start with the Me Too movement, obviously, because this has been going on forever. But it's been a conversation in Hollywood that I feel has been kind of growing a little bit more and more. And that's the idea of every time we do a director, like I went on a rant for 10 minutes, Joelle, when we did our Sofia Coppola episode, where I talked about, look at us doing this analysis on Sofia Coppola. Why can't we do this on more Black women? And why every time we talk about women directors and feminism, it's always white women. And I kind of went on this like 10-minute rant about my problem with feminism in Hollywood kind of being a code word for white feminism. Which just means like, yeah, Greta Gerwig, because she's white and blonde. And I love Greta Gerwig. I really do. But it's one of those things where it's a conversation to be had. And I feel like a lot of people ignore the fact that all these women we're celebrating behind the camera happen to be white. Can we get a little bit more Black women? And that's kind of a question I want to toss to you, is the idea of how do we shift the focus on not just saying, hey, Greta is awesome, but hey, Greta's great, but what about Ava, who's been doing it forever? What about these other Black women who are behind the camera and who are killing it? What do you think of that whole thing?
I mean, it's a challenge because, like, I don't ever want to diminish the work of, like, great women that are out here making movies. And it's not, like, I can't lay the blame at any of their feet for getting recognized or when they get. I can certainly, take a critical eye to who's being allowed in their movies, especially as we assess locations. Greta, no Asians in your film. Why? Yeah. Confusing. But like, I don't know. All I can say is that there are enough Black women working into making products that the best thing we can do is to continue to talk about them and uplift their voices and buy tickets to their movies. And like, one of the things that I've started trying to do is like just putting my money where my mouth is. Like, oh, you have like a little Kickstarter, even if there's not anything I want on it, like here's $15, like go be great. Like it's little things like that unfortunately I think Black people have just come to rely on ourselves as a community. Like we don't have the ability to do much else except lift one another up. So I hope that that's what people continue to do. There are a ton of us out here working. There's a ton of them on YouTube, women on YouTube who are creating wonderful content, good short stories on shoestring dimes with nothing but just ingenuity and guts. And yeah, if we watch their stuff, they'll continue to rise. I think and also if you look at the creators like Ava who have made space for more Black creators, right? So Ava created a TV show, which I think she cares about Queen Sugar, especially like season 1 and 2. But I really think now it's just a vehicle to get more Black women into the DGA. I really feel like she was like, this is a show that will do well enough. It's on Oprah's network, so it can't be denied. Oprah is not going to cancel the show. It does good enough numbers. And every season, it's just more Black women coming into direct so they can get their DGA credit, so they can become part of the union, so they have access to more job opportunities. And it's that stuff that changed. Matthew Cherry is really great at uplifting any of the Black people he works with. and you could go on. And and the other thing I would mention is that while social media is great at connecting us and finding people, try to look around at like your local festivals. I mean, not right now, we're in quarantine, don't be around people.
Right.
But when those things open up, like there's festivals in every single state, multiple.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter where you live, you have access to good independent cinema. And if you can find the people that maybe aren't social media inclined but are doing great things and lift them up with your own voice, it may seem like a little like maybe you don't have a large profile or whatever, but I promise you, to that film creator, it's the whole world.
Yeah, and salute to the Pan African Film Festival. I've been to a couple of them in LA, and it's a really great event at the historic Baldwin Hills theater in Crenshaw. But yeah, I think that's the key, right? It's like the connectivity and making sure we are united and standing with each other, because especially, and also I wanted to just give a couple more salutes. Salute to my mentor, Bill Duke. He's the guy who taught me pretty much literally everything I know about film when I was in high school. And more programs like that, more outreach programs that get you involved in film from a young age, and that can get young people from communities like Compton, like Carson, like South Central, and or just from any Black community in the world, and the United States. We just need more outreach. We need more opportunities. We have to work twice as hard to get half as far, so we got to change that. And I think, fortunately, and because of how prominent filmmakers like, Tyler Perry is in Atlanta, now we're seeing a lot of changes happening in that front. We saw like Black Panther literally being shot at Tyler Perry Studios. They shoot The Walking Dead at Tyler Perry Studios. So with more Black creators and more Black people in power, we start to see more Black crew behind the scenes. Another shout I want to give is Jesse Collins. He produces the Grammys, he produces the BET Awards, VH1s, all that kind of stuff. I worked for his shows before in the past. He's a really cool guy. And again, that's another one of those things where most sets you go, it's all white people. It's all white people behind the scenes. Like, it's all white camera guys. Yes. It's all white, like producers, gaffers. PAs. Yeah. But when you see a difference when you go on something like a BET Awards, or when you go on something like a or when at least I haven't seen it firsthand, but I know for some people who have interacted with Spike Lee and met Spike Lee and worked with Spike Lee on sets, they said all of this behind the scenes crew is completely diverse and unique, and he was doing that way ahead of his time. So he was putting attention towards getting people hired in front of the camera and behind the camera before it was even cool. And going to in front of the camera too, by the way, I do want to shout out Spike for how many people he put on the map. Like Halle Berry's first screen credit was in a Spike Lee movie. Tisha Campbell's first screen credit was in School Days. So like
Rosie Perez, even
Rosie Perez, Do the Right Thing, exactly. So he was instrumental in putting a lot of Black people on the map. Tyler Perry too. Taraji P. Henson. Well, at least that's how I was introduced to Taraji P. Henson, was through Tyler Perry. Yeah. And a lot of other big name talent. Tyler Perry really put to the forefront. So yeah, the more powerful people we have in front of and behind the camera, it does a really good job in helping us advance and excel more. And like you said, with Ava, with Queen Sugar, amazing stuff right there.
Yeah, shout out to Miss Numa Perrier, who Ava also put on through that, through Queen Sugar, who then has Jezebel, which is an Array release. That's the other thing. Ava doesn't stop with her television show. She also has Array, which releases, like, searches out Black independent film. Philip, hold on, Philip Usman's Burning Cane, which he's a 17-year-old, like, legitimate prodigy of film, who basically crafted his own movie. He was shooting in Louisiana, his second film. I don't know if he's still doing that. But his film is on Netflix. You can watch that now if you want to support young independent cinema, Black cinema. And then Miss Numa Perrier's Jezebel is also on there. Great, amazing film about Noom's own time as a sex worker. It's about basically learning to stand on your own 2 feet when you have absolutely nothing to get you started. And what is that journey like? And how does that become, and how does like sex play into that idea of independence? And how does sex relate to money, especially in a city like Las Vegas? Like, it's just dealing with all of these, like, sort of, I wouldn't call them taboo, but I would say racy themes. And she handles them with such, like, care and with such love and with experience. Like it's partially about her life. It's a stunning. You will be floored by it.
Yeah, my thing is always about the idea of what you guys have been talking about. Obviously, I always talk about the NBA. I have to do it one more time. but Usai Mujiri, I believe his name is, came on First Take. I don't know if you saw that interview, RB3, when he was on First Take, and he said we've seen change in our industry, in our world, because he's the president of basketball operations in Toronto, and he said he goes out of his way to hire Black women. And he says, I want to hire Black women. Look how many Black women are inside NBA circles, WNBA circles. How can we not go out of our way to hire them and see the kind of work they do? Because that's where you see the change. You'll see the talent, and you'll see the kind of things they can bring to your industry if you hire them. And that's why people going out of their way, like you said, RB3, to find the talent, to put him on camera, to put him behind the camera, to go out of their way to hire Black gaffers, Black PAs, Black talent in general is kind of the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one more thing on the athletic side. Salute to the young kid, Mikey Williams. He just announced he's like the top prodigy in like high school basketball, and he just announced that he is dedicating to HBCU, which is absolutely amazing. So that's really, really dope. I think we need to see more of that, and we just need to see more people being proud and open about being Black and making sure to represent that, because there are a lot of Black people in the industry who do step on other Black people, frankly. But you know, the more empowerment, the better we'll see going forward in the future. So.
Where do you see the future of Black female roles going, Joelle? What kind of roles do you want to see, or what kind of roles do you think are
endless roles? There's where there is legitimately zero limit to what is possible, and to like I'm loving this trend in historical films that are being like somewhat fictionalized, just being like, fuck it, we'll just colorblind cast, we don't care. That to me is beautiful, because at some point it becomes so much less about like the race relations of the time period. No, not always, don't get carried away, y'all, but sometimes you know, it doesn't really matter, especially if that society was already a monolith, you know, and wasn't dealing with any race like discussions at all. Like, throw it in there, man. It's fun and exciting, and like there were people of color around there at that time. Like we can see it in the art of the era. It's just that it hasn't made its way to film, because film started in a racist space and time. So it's that kind of stuff that I get really jazzed about. I love historical fiction, but also say, like, you know, more sci-fi projects for Black women, more like adventure roles. I would love to see, like, not necessarily a Black version of Lara Croft, but just a Black woman in nature kicking ass. Like, there's so many things that we still haven't seen, or that are only seen and aggregated toward Black individuals. And while it's great to love Black cinema and be Black, I feel like Black cinema is inherently for everyone. Like, the color of our skin does not change our ability to reach a human element. And so, yeah, that's what I want to see. I want to see no limitations. I want to see, when you cast a Sue Storm, that it's not even a question. Like, yeah, let's see some Black ladies. Who the fuck cares?
Yeah. RB3?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think more, like you said, more sci-fi, just more big budget stuff, I think is the key. And I think, you know, we're headed towards that direction. I'm excited to see what they do with Captain Marvel 2, even though, you know, Tiana Paris is not going to be like the lead in that. I hope that maybe there's a spin-off possibility. You know, I don't know why there hasn't been a Storm movie. We talked about that a little bit with Winston on our Black Superheroes episode. But yeah, there needs to be a Storm movie. There's so many opportunities that you could take to really enhance, you know, more prominent Black women on screen. And I think that it's a process. It's definitely going to take a little longer than the rest of how we're seeing cinema evolve, because it's like two hurdles to overcome: being Black and being a woman on screen. It's like that's double the trouble, at least from the white studio executive's perspective.
Absolutely.
But I think that, you know, I think if we continue to get our voices heard, we continue to address these changes, we continue to make actual structural changes throughout like the country, we have more than enough opportunity to do stuff. And I think we could see adaptations from like Black literature too. Like I always think to Octavia E. Butler's oh man, and I mention this book all the time. I mention this book all the time travel one. That I always mention. But imagine if that was made into a movie, right? I think that would be like, even though it is kind of a slave movie. Kindred, yeah. Even though it is a slave movie, I think it is like a really interesting like sci-fi concept of like, what if you time traveled to back to slavery times and you end up getting stuck in that. Like, I think that's interesting. I think there's
that movie's coming, right?
Oh, they are adapting that. Okay, I didn't know
so
that.
I don't know if it's a direct adaptation, but it's called Antebellum, and it's about a woman who from modern times who goes back and is a slave, and it's a horror film. Who stars in this movie? I want to say it might be Janelle. It is, yeah. Janelle Monáe, Gabrielle Sidibe, Kiersey Clemens.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I'm going to see that. I'm super excited for that. I think that's just a money concept. I think shows like Watchmen do a great job of helping the cause. And I think we need to see more Watchmen. We need to see more just things that promote powerful, femininity. So
well, speaking of Captain Marvel, Lashana Lynch in No Time to Die, she's in a new Bond movie coming out later this year. I don't know if you guys know who that is.
Yes. She's amazing.
She's incredible. I think she's incredible. So I'm excited for her because I'm a Bond guy, and I was like, oh, she's going to be in a Bond movie. And apparently she's like taking on the mantle. She's like a new badass 00 spy. So that's a great one. Have you guys read Children of Blood and Bone? Maybe I'm hating the wrong. Okay.
It's my favorite book series. It's so fucking good.
But that's still supposed to happen, right? That adaptation is by Lucasfilm and directed by, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. The guy who did Dope and the guy who did The Mandalorian.
Oh, Rick Famuyiwa.
Yes.
That's how you pronounce it. Yeah, no.
Famuyiwa. Yeah.
So Tomi
apparently
Adeyemi is amazing. She's the novelist who wrote the book.
Yes, she's great, and she's great in interviews too. I've seen a ton of her interviews.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and seeing that, for example, because that's like a big budget kind of thing that I'm assuming they're going to toss a lot of money into.
Oh, you know it. I'm worried because it's Disney, and please let it be. It's like a steamy book. Like it's kind of sexy. It's hyper violent. And after Artemis Fowl, I'm a little nervous. Disney, pull through for me. Don't dumb it down so much for the kiddies. You know?
Right.
Yeah. At least give me a PG-13, bro.
Right. It's for teenagers. It's a book for teenagers. You should be over 13 reading this book.
For sure.
But that's an example of something like you said, RB3, a big budget, all black cast. Throwing everything out there, like, that's cool.
And salute to Ava, for Wrinkle in Time. I mean, even though you could think whatever you want to think about that movie, but I thought, it was great just to have that moment and just to see that come on Disney Plus. Salute to Black Panther too, and I think that's more of what we need. We want to see big. I'm super excited to see the new Netflix movie by Gina Prince Bythewood, The Old Guard.
Yeah, buddy.
That's right.
Yeah. And I think just more promoting Black filmmakers, more promoting Black film, more promoting, big budget filmmaking, and more just promoting inclusion and positivity. And I think I think just positivity is always going to be the way to like change people's hearts and change people's minds. I think art and cinema is the best way to do it because it's the most commercially like accessible form of communication. So, I hope that sometime down the line we see where, we don't just have to, where we can't just list off a couple of names of a few Black women directors. There's actually just as many Black women directors as there is white male directors. I hope at some point we get to that and we're able to have a really utopian kind of look at the way, and that's to say, like, not to discredit the work of the past, right? Like, not to discredit like the films of hardship and the films of struggle that, represent our experience. But I think also representing the positivity and the family and the bigger ideas that black people in the Black community embody, I think will be really impactful. So
yeah, I think it's important to portray powerful roles, by Black actors and Black women. I think that is an important differentiating factor than from what we've seen in the past. Like you said, not to discredit the past, but it is so cool to see just these powerful roles that people can aspire to. So any final words, Joelle?
Wrinkle in Time is great, and I'll fight you over it.
You have to fight Ace over it. Because
RB3 and I saw the movie together. We saw it together, guys.
I liked it. So
Hey, we saw it together, man. You told me your thoughts.
I liked it. And people, he keeps saying that. But if you go
It's
back and
true.
watch the review, I gave the most positive review I could have given. But
yeah, I thought it was okay. I thought
Yeah.
it was okay. I thought it was a kids movie, which is fine.
It's a film designed for Black girls.
Yes,
and
which is
think
why
that's
I appreciate
yeah.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it listen, and it spoke to the little girl in me, and I think that's
Yes.
something that's incredibly hard to do, and we
Yes.
don't have a lot of films, and fucking love that movie.
No, I completely love it. Honestly, for sure. Joelle, thank you so much for coming on. Where can everyone find you?
I am just at Joelle Monique all over the internet. If you type in those 2 words, there I'll be. It's JoelleMonique. And thanks so much for having me, guys. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. Anything new you're working on, or anything you want to give a shout out to? Or
Nothing I can talk about yet, but
Oh.
soon, hopefully. Stick around.
nice, awesome. Thank you again so much for coming on. We really do appreciate it and your time.
Thank you, guys.
Alrighty, guys. For the Meaning of Podcast, I'm Andres,
it's RB3.
and we are peacing out. Peace out, guys.